And thank you. You can be seated. Good to see you out tonight. And it's the big night, Awana opening night tonight. They're all scattered all over the place in the back. So if you see anyone walking around here you don't know, be friendly to them because we're so glad they've come. And they've brought their kids, and some of them will come in afterwards and pick them up. Don't forget, if you're here tonight and you're a Sunday school teacher, connection group leader, Wednesday night, we need you to be here at, what time do we meet? 7 o'clock. 7 o'clock on Wednesday night. And we have some things you got to hear it, okay, so you know the direction that things are going. So I hope you can make it for then. And also we'll have the Bible study. Brother Mike Dalt will be handling that. So this is the night you really want to come because, it's Mike. You're going to want to be there for that. So don't miss Wednesday night if at all possible. Okay. Tonight we're going to talk just for a little bit here about a loose grip. A loose grip. I'm going to tell you a story. It's just, just an illustration. It goes, there was this small town, and the richest man in this town attended the local church there. And this rich man had this reputation in town of being very stingy, kind of a miserly type of a guy. And people didn't like him because of it. Nobody really likes a stingy miser, right? And he had this bad reputation. And one day he went to the preacher after the Sunday service, and he said, "Pastor, I don't understand what the problem is. Why do people not like me? Everybody calls me stingy. They call me a miser, and I can't figure it out. Don't they know that I have in my will that when I die, half of all of my money, which is a lot, will go to the church?" And the pastor said, "Well, let me tell you a story." Maybe some of you have heard the story. The story is of a pig and a cow. Pig and a cow are out in the barnyard, and one day the pig comes up to the cow, and the pig says, "Cow, I don't understand something. Everybody always talks bad about me." We have the jokes about pig. A pig is dirty. Everybody talks about in the mud, and the pig says, how come people always think of me as the pig? I'm dirty, and they don't talk well of me. And look at what I give them. I give them bacon. I give them ham. They even use my feet and pickle them. I provide so much for people. And everyone talks bad about me as being a filthy pig, but they talk about you good as the cow, and you give them milk and butter and all. What is the deal? How come they like you and they don't like me? And the wise old cow says, well, there's a big difference between you and me. Yes, we both give to people, but the difference is I give while I'm still alive. We don't like this idea. I'll let it catch on a little bit. See, the point is, we might think sometimes we're more generous than we really are. Well, I'm a giving person. Look what I have said, that when I die, I'm going to give my stuff away. Well, what good is it going to do for you anyway then, right? We think, sometimes maybe we think we're more generous than we are. So I want to talk a little bit about this generosity. A loose grip meaning that we shouldn't hold so tightly to things. If you're watching TV at all in the last week or two, you see appeals to give. Right, because of the floods or the hurricane, come through Texas, and now Irma coming up through Florida there, and there's one commercial on with all the former living presidents, and they're saying, hey, why don't you give to these funds? We see things about the Red Cross, and of course you can give through the Southern Baptist Association, which is probably what I would recommend of all the places. You give to those, but we start talking about being generous and how the American people will band together and how they will do things and how they will help people with their needs. And so it's really it's a testing time. Will we give? And it's not just for this. You can give so many. You can give to your church. You can give to people who have needs. There's so many places to give. But what I want to look at tonight is look at ourselves and think, am I really all that generous? Or do I hold too tightly to things? So we're going to look here in the book of Proverbs tonight, Proverbs chapter 11. I want you to turn there with me, if you will. Proverbs chapter 11, and we're just going to have a few verses we're going to talk about. Verses 24 to 28 tonight. Let's read these. Proverbs chapter 11, verse 24. There is one who scatters, yet increases more. And there is one who withholds more than is right, but it leads to poverty. The generous soul will be made rich, and he who waters will also be watered himself. The people will curse him who withholds grain, but blessing will be on the head of him who sells it. He who earnestly seeks good finds favor, but trouble will come to him who seeks evil. He who trusts in his riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like foliage. Now, I'm not so sure that I really have to say much after reading those verses because they're so clear. Sometimes you got to try to explain, this is what the Bible's saying, but how much explanation do we need after reading something like that? Everybody hates you if you're stingy, and everybody loves you if you're not stingy. And if you're stingy and you're trying to hoard things for yourself, it's because you're trusting in riches rather than God. That's really the point here. Not much more I have to say. But I want you to get your money's worth tonight, so I have a few other things to tell you too. Okay? But that's the thing you need to go home with tonight. Okay? If you're trusting in your riches, you're not trusting in God, and that's a big problem. We don't like to think too much about giving, right? Oh man, every time I go to church, they're talking about money. Or every time I turn on TV, somebody wants money. Every time I get a phone call, it's somebody wanting money for the police or for the whatever. Everybody always wanting money for something. And the kids come to the door, knock on the door, and they're selling Girl Scout cookies. And they ought to just give those things away. That's what I think. I like them, But or they're selling candy bars, or they're selling a fundraiser. They're selling. We did all those things when we were kids, knock on doors, and try to sell things. Everybody's wanting money from something, right? And sometimes we don't like to think about that because we want to hold this to ourselves. But it's not just money, though. We can be stingy in so many ways. Somebody needs help and we don't offer help. Somebody has a need and we don't offer a need, whatever it happens to be. But then we turn to Proverbs here, and it talks about us as stingy people. Sometimes we withhold, we try to keep more than we should have, but it leads to poverty. So it's pretty simple here tonight. First of all, the first point is a backwards principle. You say, what does that mean? What it means is you read here in Proverbs and you say, this sounds backwards. Especially when you come there to verse 24. Let's read that again and understand this isn't how we usually think, right? Verse 24, there's one who scatters and yet increases more. Doesn't make sense. If I scatter, I lose, right? But no, there's one who scatters but increases. There is one who withholds more than is right, but it leads to poverty. You say, that's just opposite of logic. Because if I throw something out on the ground, I don't have it anymore. But if I keep it, I have it. That's what makes sense. But the principle here, as far as giving and generosity, is that when you scatter, you end up getting more in return. When you hold it for yourself, you end up losing it. That's the biblical principle here. So this idea of scattering, it seems like we have this idea often in the Bible. You put it out there and then more comes back. Now understand, we don't give to get back. Okay? But there is principle in the Bible about giving, and then God blesses you and takes care of your needs. And also, we'll probably mention this in a minute, but don't think it means that we should never save. Okay, that's another subject that's very important. But the idea is not being stingy, not holding everything so tightly to ourselves, and not giving. That's what we're talking about here. How many of you have grown potatoes? Potatoes are a pretty nice thing to grow if you're just starting a garden, because they just kind of come up on their own, right? Then it takes a little bit of work. You got to hill them up and everything. But to grow potatoes, you know how you grow potatoes? You don't go out and buy potato seed. You take potatoes, right? And I'm kind of cheap. I've been known to grow last year's potatoes, right? Or go down to the store and cut them up and put them in there. Technically, you're supposed to go and buy the disease-free and all that. But you take a potato, and you instead of eating that potato, which you can do, you cut it up, and you just make sure you have a little eye in there, right? And if you leave it sit, how many of you left your potatoes sit too long in the bin, and they grow and they sprout? We had this noise in our house. We had some. I guess we forgot about them. We had this bin there, and we kept hearing this noise. Lori says, there's got to be like a snake or rhinoceros or something in that room. Everything is big. It's a spider. It's huge in there. And I go in and I couldn't find anything. Finally, I figured out these things were growing and starting to make some noise. We forgot about them. How they really spread out. But you could take a potato. You make sure it has an eye. You have a choice. I could eat this potato, or I could cut it up into a few pieces and plant it. If I eat it, you say, well, I've saved my potato. But if you cut it up, and you could have maybe 4 or 5 if you do it right, potatoes, and each one of those will expand out into more. That's the principle. It's like taking one apple, taking the seeds from one apple, and eventually you could have an orchard from it. But you have to let it go in order to get that from it. That's the principle here. There's one who scatters, and they throw it out there, but it increases more. It's planting that seed like you do in your garden, and you plant that seed, and then you get more from it. There's one who scatters, and then they get more, But then there's one who withholds or hoards. Maybe I shouldn't ask. Do we have any hoarders in here? You've seen them on TV, right? I'm going to show you this. How many of you have seen this word right here? Disposophobia. You ever heard that word before? It's exactly what it sounds like. It's the fear of throwing things away. I have a lot of fun. Every once in a while I go and look up these phobia words because it's really a lot of fun to look them up and see. There's like a fear of everything. And my favorite, and I'll probably show this to you guys sometime if I talk about it, my favorite is phobophobia. It's a fear of fear. Now that one's freaky to have when you're afraid of being afraid. You can't win that ball game, right? But disposophobia is the fear of throwing things away. Some people have that, right? And you've seen them on TV probably. Remember that show? I don't know if it's still on. That show Hoarders or whatever. And they go and they try to help people clean this stuff up. You know it's just going to go back to the way it was because it's just built in them. You hoard. And that's the idea here. We think if I have more, if I hoard more, then I have more. But the real principle we're talking about here is refusing to help people because we want to keep it all for ourselves. If I give it to you, then I no longer have it. And I want to have it for myself because I fear for my future. I'm working for my retirement. I'm working, I want to have go to a nice restaurant next week or whatever. So I want that for myself so I don't give it to somebody else. And that's exactly what this is talking about. There's one who scatters and gives, yet somehow it comes back. But there's one that holds it tight. And it molds and it rots and they don't have it anymore. And that's the principle here. It's the idea of giving. I want you, if you will, to go with me to the book of Luke. You guys probably know this example that we have here of a guy who was hoarding, and maybe it's even come to your mind as we're sitting here tonight. Luke chapter 12. It's this story of this man who wanted to build bigger barns. And tell you, this is convicting, guys, isn't it? Sometimes. Every once in a while we'll drive by a house, and there's a little house and a big old garage. And guys, if your wife says, why is that garage bigger than the house? And all the guys are like, isn't it obvious? A man can't have a big enough garage or shed, can he? You always want more room. So we know what this guy's dealing with here, because you never can have a big enough place to store all your stuff and all your treasures, and I'm trying to think of a nice way to say this, all the wonderful things we keep. So this is kind of convicting because how many times you said, I need a bigger barn, I need a bigger shed. But let's look at what this guy is dealing with here. Luke chapter 12, verse 16. And he spoke a parable to them, saying, the ground of a certain rich man yielded plentifully, and he thought within himself, saying, what shall I do, since I have no room to store my crops? So he said, I'll do this. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there I'll store all my crops and my goods. And I'll say to my soul, I just like when people talk to themselves. This is kind of neat. Soul, self, this is going to be fun. So you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided? So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. The problem isn't that the guy was storing up for the future. The problem was that he was saying, you know what? If I can have all this stuff, if I can keep this and build bigger barns and have more and get all this stuff, then I will be self-sufficient. I don't need any help, and I'll be okay, and I don't have to do anything the rest of my life. Do you ever wonder what you would do if you got this serious windfall? Now, I know you guys don't waste your money playing the lotto. I know you're smarter than that, okay? But something else. Some rich uncle dies. I've calculated up my family, and I don't have any rich uncles, so I'm out of luck. But, you get this money, and you don't have to work. Everything's all set. What would you do with your life? You ever stop and think about that? What would you do? Sit back and watch TV? You could get a pretty nice TV, right? Or would that free you up to not have to go to work every day, but instead go out and be a philanthropist and help people? If you could honestly answer that question, it might give you an idea of the heart. There's nothing wrong with having stuff. That's not what this is about. What this is about is saying, okay, I can just sit back and not do anything now. I don't have to fulfill my purpose in life. I can just sit back and I'm set for the rest of my life. That's what God is getting at here. That's what Jesus was getting at in this parable. But this is so important. I want to write this down. This is not a prohibition against saving, but against hoarding out of greed. I would hate for someone to come out here tonight and say, oh, we don't need to save, right? We're just supposed to give. Because there's plenty of principles in the Bible about saving. It's a wise man who saves, who thinks about the time. Go to the ant, thou sluggard, consider her ways and be wise, right? Because she stores up when she has plenty, so she'll have it when she doesn't. You think about retirement. You think about things are going to break down in the house, and a wise person prepares for that. A wise person prepares for the next car that you got to buy, all these things. So it's not don't save. We got to save. It's wise, and it's beneficial. We need to do that. The point is trusting in our riches. If I have all this, then I don't any longer have to trust God at all. I just have so much stuff for myself. Meanwhile, other people don't have enough. That's the principle that Jesus is getting here. This man says, I'm going to build bigger barns so I can sit back and not do anything. And Jesus says, no. That man is called a fool because he's trusting in his riches rather than trusting in God. So there we have a backwards principle. It's not the same as we might think. We might think if I keep more, I have more. And if I let it go, I lose it. But Jesus says, and God says, it's the other way around. You scatter and you increase. You try to hold it and you'll end up losing it. That's the principle we need. That's backwards. So let's move to the next one now. If we give, there is a blessing in return. God has this incredible way of blessing people in ways that we cannot fathom, that we will never guess. Verse 25, the generous soul will be made rich, and he who waters will also be watered himself. The generous soul. But this is interesting. I want you to get this. It says the generous soul, in my Bible here anyway, generous soul. This word, generous, or a form of it, is usually translated in the Bible as blessing. The soul that is a blessing for people will be made rich. It describes a person who blesses people. If you've given to these flood victims, you have blessed somebody somewhere. If you've given it through the right agency and didn't get all stuck on bureaucracy somewhere for some rich people. But if you've given, like the announcement we made last week, you can give to the state convention or the national convention, whatever, that will bless somebody. And someone who doesn't even know you, maybe their house will be helped to be rebuilt. Maybe some of that money will use to clear debris off or to buy clothes for kids or something. You've blessed somebody, and you might not ever know who they are. This is the person who is a blessing is who we're talking about here. That one will be made rich. Now, how many of you are reading the King James Bible here tonight? You got that in front of you? What does that say? The liberal soul shall be made fat? Is that what it says? Fat. Now, I always thought that was interesting. You look at it and say, I'm not so sure I want to be generous. Generous, liberal. It's not talking about politics, liberal. It's talking about giving, okay? It's the same word, just translated as liberal. I just give and give. To me, so you look at it and say, man, I'm not so sure if I want that. I don't want to be made fat. That doesn't sound so good. But just understand that word fat, it means the same. It's the same word here, just translated a different way. It means I have plenty. Rich. You have enough. So don't fear being generous. Say, I'm going to get fat, okay? It's the soul. It's not the body anyway. The idea is you have enough. If you see somebody who is really skinny and gaunt, you say that person, might be some other problem, but maybe they don't have enough. And they don't have enough there. But you see someone who's, they're okay. You can tell they've been eating decent meals, like most of us have that issue. We say, okay, that person has enough. That's the idea here. He says, the person who is liberal or the person who is generous and gives to people, they will have enough. God will see to that. God will make sure that happens. They'll have enough. The generous soul will be made rich, or the liberal soul will be made fat. And he who waters will also be watered himself. Now, we understand what he's saying. You water things and then you'll be watered yourself. But understand that in this culture here in which this was written, that would have been much more picturesque than it is in our nation. Because if you're thirsty, you just run out back here and get a drink out of the drinking fountain, right? Some of you might even have some jug of water sitting there on the floor next to you or something. You might have, water is just all over the place here in our nation, right? We have it. Well, in those days, in this area, it was more of a dry region. and dusty. And we even, in Jesus' day, we read about how they would wash people's feet because they would walk on the roads and they'd be all dirty and dusty from walking, and it'd be hot. And so to get water was much more of a relief than we really comprehend today. So giving water, being generous to someone in that situation was such a wonderful thing because it was so necessary. You think about the account there with Rebekah back in Genesis chapter 24, where Abraham's servant came looking for a wife for Isaac. And you remember he came to the well there, and he had all his camels, and Rebekah came, and he asked, Rebekah, hey, can you get me some water? And she gave water to all the camels and everything. That worked pretty good for her, literally giving water. She was generous. She could have just given him a glass of water or a dipper of water, but she watered him. She gave him all that he could use, watered all the camels, did everything like that, and she was very generous in this, and she got a husband out of it. Now, most of our young people are on the back, but if I said that on Sunday morning when the young people were in here, next Sunday we might have some young ladies standing at the door with water. You get a husband if you give water, but you can't take that literally in that sense. The point is that they understood if you water, you'll be watered yourself. And it's like water was one of the best things you could give to people. They would understand this. The idea is giving. Matter of fact, Jesus said this, Mark chapter 9, verse 41, "For whoever gives you a cup of water to drink in my name because you belong to Christ, surely I say to you, he will by no means lose his reward." It's about water, and that's the principle being taken here. And it doesn't have to be water. It could be money, it could be clothes, it could be time, it could be just care and empathy, right? It's something that you're giving to them. You give it out, and God sees this. It's almost like he makes a mark. Okay, I saw what you gave. I'm going to make sure you don't go without that because you did it for the right reasons, and you did it, especially you did it for me. Another verse, Luke 6:38. This one's just interesting. This is a really neat verse. Luke, it's on your outline too. "Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be put into your bosom. For with the same measure that you use, it will be measured back to you." Have you ever spent much time thinking about that verse? Again, don't think, well, if I give $100, God is obligated to pack that down and give me like $150 back. That's the point. Isn't what can I give back? Well, man, some of you have seen, probably like I have. Have you ever heard the phrase, "You can't outgive God"? Yeah, and I know it's a phrase, and the way it's kind of trite because we use it all the time, but maybe you've seen it in your own life. I've seen it, and I'm not going to give you stories about it. That's my business between my wife and me and God. But, you can give, and you're like, God somehow takes care of things. And it's incredible. Matter of fact, this just came to my mind. We had a guy, he was an older guy. He's like, I don't know, he's probably 96, 97, something like this now. But, his wife was gone, and he was really big into missions. This was his thing. And he told me one day, I was sitting there with him, this was a few years ago, and he says, "You know what?" He says, "I just decided I was going to support missionaries." He says, "I don't need much." He had like this condo, that he lived in, and he lived by himself, and he was okay. He didn't really need a whole lot. And so he said, I looked at my income, and which, isn't a whole lot at that age, and he says, I'm going to give a certain amount to missions. So he started giving a certain amount to missions. And he said, well, that's working out. And so he added some to it. And he may have given me the numbers, and I don't remember for sure now. But he said, and that kept working out. And he said, if I were to sit down and do my budget, this wasn't going to work. But every time I increased it, it worked. And so I kept increasing it and kept increasing it till it was like impossible to give and keep living. But it kept working for him. And he's like, he told me, Pastor, he said, I don't know how this works. It just does. And it's in to listen to his story. It's like, wow, this is, we were so afraid to give to God because I need it myself. But God has this way of saying, you're going to give it to me for the right reasons. You're okay. I got you taken care of. Got you covered. I'm afraid a lot of times, maybe not every time, I understand there's things that happen. But oftentimes, this is my experience in dealing with people. Oftentimes, and don't get mad at me, I didn't say every time, but a lot of times, if someone is in severe problem, number one, it's because they have really been foolish with their finances, but number two, they're not giving. they're not tithing. They're not giving anything to missionaries. They're not giving. And they can't figure out why ends don't meet. That'd be the first bit of advice I give anybody. I can't make ends meet. Are you tithing? No, I can't afford it. You can't afford not to tithe. God will get what Malachi talks about that. We're going to have all those sermons on that, right? The Bible talks about giving. You can't afford not to. I'm telling you this, I would be scared to death not to tithe. I would be scared to death not to tithe. At least tithe. Because God's going to get it. This wasn't in my notes either. I'll be here all night if I keep remembering these things. But this one guy, we knew him back in West Virginia. He was in our church. And he had this side job. He reffed college basketball. And he said, he told me one day, he said, I thought this is like a side job, And he said, I tithe off my regular job. But the side job, I figured that's extra. I don't need to tithe off that. No big deal. And so he ended up getting hurt. And I don't remember if it was on the job or not, but he said, along with his loss of being able to do this job and the medical bills, he said, I figured it out, and God got back the money that I should have been tithing. Wow. It's because he wants to come first, right? And that's exactly what it's talking about here in Proverbs. We want to withhold, we want to keep it for ourselves, and God has a way of saying, I'm going to get what I want. Malachi, will the man rob God? He says, he's talking to the Jews, but you've robbed me. And people say, we didn't take anything out of the offering plate. No, you robbed me because you didn't give me what was rightfully mine. This wasn't meant to be about tithing. That just came to my mind, but that's like the first place it shows up. I'm not going to give to God. Let me just warn you about that. Better give to God because he's got ways of getting what he wants. Give and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over will be put into your bosom. You've seen that, some of you. You can give, and God just has this way of taking care of the needs and pushing it down and cramming it in there and just dumping it back out. And maybe put him to the test every once in a while. It's incredible what he can do. One of the things that we love to do, and some of you will find out about this, is we love to make Christmas cookies. Christmas cookies are like our thing. Well, my thing. I think my wife goes along with it, right? We always did this when I was a kid. And we give them out, and, we used to invite the whole church over for Christmas, and, I don't think we can do that here because you don't have room for all the people. But we love to make Christmas cookies. But you know what we do? When we look at the recipe, usually we triple the recipe. You know why we triple the recipe? I can't talk my wife into quadrupling it. That's why we triple the recipe, right? But we triple the recipe, and what we're doing is we're using more flour. We're wasting flour. We're using more. We're throwing all the sugar in there, and then a little extra when nobody's looking, right? And we're using all this stuff. But guess what we get? We get triple the cookies, or one really big one. Depends on how you want to look at it, right? The more you put in, the more you get back. And so why is it that we think the more I give to people or the more I give to God, the less I have? God's keeping an eye on all of this stuff, and he's saying, you're giving with the right attitude. I got you covered. You're okay. We've seen that in our life, and you've probably seen that in your life too. Proverbs 19:17, he who has pity on the poor lends to the Lord, and he will pay back what he has given. That's a different way of looking at this. You have pity on the poor. There's somebody who doesn't have as much as you, and you have pity and you give to them. It says you are lending to the Lord. We think I'm giving and I lost it. And God says, thanks for the loan. You're lending to the Lord, and God will repay. I guess that's better than putting it in the bank, right? When you're lending it to the Lord. Because he has got this principle of giving it back, pressed down, shaking together, running over. And again, don't get me, this is not prosperity. It's not you give a little something, you plant the seed of faith, and send money to me, and God's going to give you everything you want. That's not what this is talking about. It's the principle of putting God first and trusting him and saying, you want me to give, and I'll give, and I'm going to trust you to take care of things. Now, that doesn't mean give instead of taking care of your family. I hate to put all these little disclaimers in there, but you got to take the whole Bible together, okay? You got to understand the whole thing. Yeah, it doesn't mean give where you can't take care of your family, but we have so much stuff. And we might not be able to go out to eat one meal this week because there's somebody else that has a need. I mean, is that really a sacrifice anyway? It isn't. But we just want to hoard. We want to keep things for ourselves because we find comfort and strength in knowing that we have plenty. Sometimes we need to give it. So here's the principle. The principle is that one who offers to meet the needs of others will have his own needs met. That's the biblical principle. Meet the needs of other people, God's going to take care of your own needs. And oftentimes he'll do that through other people. Somebody maybe will come to you and say, I have no idea why, I just feel like I should give you this. You ever hear the stories about somebody who goes to the mailbox and finds money? College students. That happened to me twice. I think I know who did it, but this person will not admit it. And when I was in college, a couple weeks apart, I went to the mailbox in there, and there was some cash in the envelope. When you're a college student, it's like finding a diamond ring somewhere. A $10 bill is like, wow. How does this work? God points to people, and he says, hey, you give this, you give that. And if we're the one he comes to and says to give it, then we need to do it. There's one who scatters yet increases more. There's one who withholds more than is right, but it leads to poverty. The generous soul will be made rich, and he who waters will also be watered himself. Verse 26, the people will curse him who withholds grain, but blessing will be on the head of him who sells it. Now, you say, wait a minute here. We're supposed to give, but now it's talking about selling. That might seem a little bit confusing. So you just got to understand, it's not wrong to sell stuff, okay? We might think, I need to give everything away and walk around with nothing but the clothes on my back. That's not the point either. The point we're getting at here in verse 26 is that, again, it just goes back to hoarding. I just want to keep it all for myself. I want to have plenty for myself. And he says, no, spread it around a little bit, okay? Sometime you need to give, sometime you need to sell. The point is, don't hoard and thereby trust your riches. Allow God to use these things. By the way, it will really help if you understand that you own nothing, right? We own nothing. Naked came I in the world, and naked I'll leave, right? And we gather all this stuff in the meantime, and then we die and leave it to people who are going to waste it. We own nothing. God owns everything. He just allows us to manage things for a while. And if we can really get a hold of that, it helps us a little bit. Understand, God puts these things in our hands, and I'm supposed to use it the way he wants me to use it, not just to keep it so I have all this stuff, and then I don't have to trust him anymore. Well, let's move on here. Let's move down to the last point here. A benevolent heart. By the way, isn't this cute? They're all bees, okay? I don't usually do that, but this time I did. A backwards principle, a blessing in return, a benevolent heart. I don't usually do that because if you alliterate everything, people think you found it off the internet, and I didn't do that, okay? But it worked out in this situation. A benevolent heart. That's what God wants. Proverbs 11, verse 27. He who earnestly seeks good finds favor. You're looking for good and you're helping people. But trouble will come to him who seeks evil. He who trusts in his riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like foliage. I think this is the primary point we're getting at here. You trust in your riches, you're going to fall. This is what we're getting at here. Your generosity reveals the condition of your heart. You say, I have this hard time being generous. I have this hard time giving. The problem is our hearts. A heart is not one that trusts God, that understands that God will take care of the needs if we're putting him first. I don't want to give because I need to have this stuff. You know the account of the rich young ruler? It's over in Matthew 19. We won't turn there right now. He came to Jesus, and Jesus said, this is what you need to do. You need to sell everything you have and give to the poor and come follow me. And then you can be my disciple. And the man was sad about that. He went away sad because he had a lot of possessions. He had a lot of stuff, and he wasn't willing to give it away. And we've all discussed that in time. We know that Jesus wasn't saying you become saved by selling everything you have and giving it away. We understand that's not the point. The point was that this man was not willing to trust. You've got to be able to trust in order to be saved. His riches and money, things like that, were what was standing in the way. And he wasn't willing to be a follower. He wasn't willing to trust in Jesus. He thought, I can buy my way in, or I can do this nice stuff or whatever. But Jesus said, let me test your heart. Are you really in? Or are you just trying to add eternal life on everything else you have in your life? Try this. Go sell everything you have, give it to the poor. No, I'm not going to do that. Well, guess what? You don't really care. He just wanted to add God onto his life. There was nothing serious. It was a heart issue. It's a heart. When we're not willing to give, and I'm not saying go home and give everything you have away, but if we're not willing to give, it shows that it's a heart issue. We're not willing to trust. I don't know if God can take care of me, so I'm not going to give something. But just try it. Just try it sometime. Give. And this was not meant to be about tithing tonight, but if that's an issue in your life, my encouragement is just try. And I put this out, and I'll probably do this here sometime too, so you'll all get a sneak preview. I've done this before, and I've talked about tithing. I said, tell you what, just give God a try. And I don't remember what number. I said maybe 8 weeks, 2 months. Okay? Just tithe. But wait, what is a tithe? A tithe is 10% of everything that comes in. Gross pay, but that's for another day. It's a percent. You say, I don't have, did you make $1 last week? Then your tithe is a dime. It's a percentage, right? So just if you've never, just try it for 2 months. And if God doesn't take care of your needs, assuming you're not, buying all kinds of new stuff and wasting all that, but if God doesn't help take care of your needs, then as far as I'm concerned, you're off the hook. I'm not going to bring it up to you again. And actually, most people say, oh, great idea, or I'm already tithing. But this one person came through a couple months later, and they said, remember when you said that? I tried it, and God has come through for me. Wow, big surprise. He said he would, right? He said it. So give him a try. But tithing, that's only one. By the way, tithing really isn't giving. Tithing is a requirement. What we're talking about here is giving what is ours. Tithe is not yours to begin with, okay? If you can't do that, then you're going to have a hard time being generous in other areas. That's the basic. We're talking about above that. We're talking about helping people who have needs. They don't have as much as us. We're talking about, people that are maybe experiencing the flood, or your neighbor who doesn't have much, or someone that really has a need, and we help them out of something that is ours. That's what we're talking about here. And if we're not willing to do that, it's probably an issue with our heart. Through this passage here we read, there's a lot of contrast between the person who's generous and the person who's not generous. So our question is, which side are we going to be on? Are we going to be on the side of the person who's generous? Are we going to give? Are we going to be on the side of the person who is not generous and who hoards for ourselves? Well, it's pretty clear. If you're the generous person, God's going to take care of the needs. But if you hoard, then you're going to end up losing it. Final thing to write down right here. Our desire to give reveals the depth of our trust. It reveals the depth of our trust. Look again there at verse 28. He who trusts in his riches will fall, but the righteous will flourish like foliage. It's about trust. Who are you trusting? Who are you trusting to take care of you? You trusting that 401k? It might be doing pretty good right now. Stock market's up. What about when it goes down? Because that's liable to happen. Now we're in trouble. No, we trust God. Well, I can't give because then I don't have enough for all the stuff I want. Trust in God. It's a trust issue. How do you know you can trust God? Do you know who God is? I mean, think about who God is. God is omnipotent. He's all-powerful. He knows everything, omniscient. All kinds of, study the names of God. We'll do that one day. There's a great book on it, by the way. But you read about, you study about the names of God and understand who God is. How can we not trust God when we know who He is? When we read in the Bible about things He's done. This morning, maybe in your classes, you studied about coming out of Egypt, or the Pharaoh and the plagues and all that was happening. And, look what He can do. Can't He take care of our little needs if we're putting Him first? It's a trust issue. So my encouragement to you is trust Him. You feel like a tug you're supposed to give to someone for something, but you're kind of afraid because you want that for yourself? Just scatter. There's one who scatters and yet increases. Then there's one that withholds and keeps it for himself, but he ends up being in want. We want to be the one who scatters and let God take care of the details. Let's bow our heads tonight. Just you and God here tonight. You want to just talk to him for a minute and say, God, is there something I'm supposed to give? Maybe your prayer should be, help me to be willing to give. Help me to trust, because that's the bottom line. Who are we trusting? Our riches, or are we trusting God? Father, thank you tonight for the encouragement from the Bible to be generous, to give. We know there's so many people in our nation right now that they have great needs. And even right now, as the hurricane's coming up through Florida, most of us know people very closely who are right now in the middle of this hurricane. Maybe they need help. Father, show us where they need help. Maybe that's a neighbor that we have. Maybe it's something. Maybe there's someone struggling even with giving what is rightfully yours in the tithe. Whatever the needs are tonight, I just ask you to speak to us and let us trust. Let us trust in you as the one who can take care of all our needs. In Jesus' name, amen.